Hi, I'm Amber.
And I'm Jessie.
And this is Glowing in Tech.
Powered by Coding Black Females.
Amazing.
Okay, so now we're going to be doing our tech topic in 10, where Zoe is going to introduce and explain a technical topic in under 10 minutes. Think of it as a lightning talk, which is an opportunity for Zoe to demystify a topic or an area that's often intimidating for newbies or people that are not experts in the field. So, Zoe, what's your tech topic in 10 today?
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about demystifying data engineering. And so I'll just get into
Fantastic.
it.
Take it away.
So I think it's really understandable that people are worried about sharing their personal data and generally scared of things data related at this point, but specifically with Netflix shows coming out and different things like the Great Hack. Yeah. I think it's fair to say that companies have lost our trust in this respect, which is of course what will happen if you sign up for a free social media, on the guise of wanting to catch up with old friends and stay connected, and then you realize that your likes and dislikes have been commercialized and sold to advertising companies. Ultimately, your data has been used to target adverts to persuade you to buy something, and now the free social network doesn't seem so free anymore. However, this mistrust has led to fear-mongering about big data and the algorithms, and I think we've kind of forgotten that data engineering can and should be used for good. Organizations being able to unlock the power of their data enables them to do their jobs better and essentially make data-driven decisions, which in some cases, can save lives. Take, for example, a vaccine distribution center. They're in charge of distributing incoming vaccines to vaccination sites across the country. So managing their supply chain of, I need this X number of vaccines of Pfizer and I have 20 sites across the company that I need to send these vaccines to and distribute. It's not going to be an equal number because the sites will have different populations associated, maybe different age demographics. There's all this data that needs to go into this decision. And so there are two key elements when you think of unlocking the power of your data. The first is being able to use all the data that's available to you to then make your decision. So when you're deciding how many vaccines should go to a certain site, or where to distribute them to, you want to take into account people eligible for the vaccine or also estimations for walk-ins. So you have a full understanding, like you can see the full picture. So being able to make a decision where you actually have all of the information you need to make that decision. And the second is when you then make that decision, okay, we need to send 100,000 vaccines to this site. Like that shouldn't be the end of it. The outcome of that decision should then be fed back into the solution to help you make a better decision tomorrow. A continuous loop of this better decision making on data. And what I've learned in my career is that we shouldn't solely rely on AI decision making. And I don't think that that's necessarily the way forward. I think humans making AI assisted data driven decisions is the way forward. So as I talked about this feedback loop, we can then make better decisions and then have a algorithm that helps you decide, okay, last time you gave 100,000, but X amount was wasted, so therefore you should reduce it by this amount. Or now that we're onto the new age demographic, we actually think there's going to be an influx. And so the AI algorithm can help you make suggestions, but ultimately it's that human that's going to make the decision. And it's really important to keep a human in the loop for accountability. When it comes to AI, there's very complicated ethics around who's responsible. And I know that's a whole other conversation. But keeping a human in the loop, a human expert, but giving them data and the power of algorithms to help them do their job better is actually where I see like the biggest benefit. And so solving the world's biggest problems is going to require a data-driven approach. And we need the best minds working on these problems. And it would be a shame to see people put off from working with data because there's a fear that it's inherently wrong. And it's undeniable that there are nuances about this topic, particularly the shows that I mentioned, like they highlight that. But that's why it's important to work with data ethics professionals as they put the privacy of individuals first and ensure that any data use is appropriate and proportionate. And while on the topic of careers, I've mentioned a few sort of data engineers and also like people in data ethics. I think there's also a misconception that you're either a software engineer or potentially a project manager, or this notion that you're either technical or you're not. There are a wealth of opportunities within the tech industry. You can be a data engineer, product engineer, solutions engineer, cloud engineer, security engineer, business analyst. Like the list really does go on. And I do believe there is something for everyone, and everyone should be, have a seat at this table, and everyone should find like an opportunity within tech if they want to. So that is my lightning talk.
That's amazing. I have a few questions on this. The first of which is, how do you think as engineers or the people building technology, how can we kind of allow others to have more trust in what we're doing?
Yeah, so the big one there is transparency. So I think it's being transparent about what you're going to use the data for, making sure that yourself know that it is appropriate and proportionate. You're not like asking for too much or using it in a way that wasn't how someone like signed up for it. So if you sign up for a certain app and then it's then transferred to a third party just because you put it in some small text, like I think that that's also wrong. It should be, you're signing up to this service and we will use this service with your data to help you with this. And so, sorry, I don't know what the end of your question was.
No, that was it. It's like as an engineer, I'm building software that takes people's data in and does something with it and presents it back to them. But how can I ensure that, I guess that I'm doing the right thing by them and allowing them to have trust? Because, like you said, there is this mad wave of mistrust at the moment. And do we have a role in it as engineers to facilitate the kind of mending of that relationship?
Yeah, exactly. So the first thing was transparency, and the second thing is just ensuring that you do have a team that is dedicated to data ethics and privacy and having them align on what you're actually doing. Eventually, legislation will help with this, but data legislation, I think, is far behind where the industry is at the moment. And so you have to kind of be better than what the law regulates. Like that is the bare minimum of what you can do with data. You need to build your morals and ethics and how you use data on top of that. It needs to be additive. It needs to be more, and ensuring that there's all sorts of security that you need to have around it as well, depending on what data you have. But definitely appropriate usage and also proportionate, that you're using it for what you set out to do. So transparency and internal ethics boards where you're all on the same line. You can't have one engineer's ethics or standard being here and another one's being there. Like you need to have a unified front on what you will and will not do.
So I have a question for both of you. Back in sixth form, we had a whole presentation on like what Snapchat is doing with our data, what Facebook is doing with our data, because at the end of the day, they have these huge terms and conditions with what they're actually doing, which we don't read. And so what
designed that way.
Literally. And it's just like, I'm realistically not going to read all these things, right? And what made me really scared about what companies are doing with my data was when I watched The Great Hack. Because learning about like Cambridge Analytica and the fact that they were essentially using our data against us and like to kind of manipulate the way that we vote was quite worrying. Like it was just like, so what kind of data points do you have on me? I didn't even understand that data was worth this much. So when I'm seeing these pop-ups like allow all cookies, reject all cookies, I'm just like, girl, like what we doing? Like so it's like I'm rejecting these cookies, but at the end of the day, am I realistically going to make such an effort for these companies to like not collect my data points? I think that a lot of people are scared of what they're doing with our data, but they can't be bothered to actually like do something about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and in some cases, I sometimes feel like the damage is already done. Like I've had, certain social media accounts since I was 11. So it's like years and years of data of me, growing up and my likes and dislikes changing. And they have all of that recorded. And that's definitely, I think, something we should be cautious of. And, talking about, what you said about Cambridge Analytica and all the things there definitely should be illegal. And so again, going back to the fact that legislation is always behind. But I think separating that experience that you have with a social network, for example, with, for healthcare services. So I've worked very closely with sort of like a cancer research center in the US, and like, you know, they're doing really, really powerful things with data to ultimately find a cure for cancer and collaborate, you know, across like healthcare institutions with that data to then help solve this problem. And so, you know, and even climate change and things like that is all going to require a data-driven approach. But we need to separate that from like the commoditization of data and how those things can look fairly similar when spoken about, like data, algorithms, AI, but actually they're really different. And it's a nuanced subject. It is difficult, but I think not to be scared of all and actually just, okay, let's investigate this being the first response.
Yeah. Because even on the topic of climate change, there are people who are targeting those who don't believe that it's real. And it's that they're actually using our data to spread misinformation. Yeah. There's people actually who think the earth is flat. I thought it was a joke. Yeah. I thought it was a joke.
That's a real community.
It's a real thing. And they're saying things like, even when you Google something, my search results can be very different to
they are,
someone who actually thinks the world is flat. So if I Google like is the world flat, it will probably come up with all the reasons why it isn't. But if someone who is in that space Googles it, it will come up with all the reasons why it actually is. That's terrifying.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. So is your question about like how the individual can be empowered to kind of why?
Because it was my question.
No, like, what was your question?
It was more like they're just using our. It's just like just a added point, the fact that they're using our data like to spread misinformation.
Yeah.
And it's just like that's why like there's these extremes on both sides.
Yeah.
And it's just so it's quite challenging to know what is actually the truth. Because what if I'm laughing at people who think the earth is flat and then I'm in space and I actually see the earth is flat? Like, how do I know I'm on the right side of information? Like that's what I want, because we don't know. We're kind of just, it's kind of like a good guess that we're on the right side, but we actually don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a lot to do with how much the individual, because it's very easy to be overwhelmed by all the information we have access to and assume that all the people that we have access to on our social networks are also the closest to the truth. So I think it's really difficult. We're at a point where we need to make sure that people feel empowered enough to understand that what you just said, that they're often being presented with information that aligns with their views and their values. And, you know, we hear a lot about the echo chamber on in terms of politics and all of the controversial topics we have online.
It's time for Tech Tea. So Zoe is going to share her controversial take on something within the industry, which is
misconceptions of meritocracy.
Amazing.
So first of all, what's meritocracy?
Essentially, meritocracy is this idea that you are valued on a certain trait. For example, if you take like a pianist, they are judged based on their like skills in that field. And it's essentially like you are valued on how good you are at this thing and only that thing. So essentially, it's like, how can you like value someone based on something they do or a skill? And in this case, it would be, you know, within the tech industry, either a technical skill or just generally how people use it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. So I don't have a problem with the idea of meritocracy itself. The example I just gave about like a pianist, like I think that is a genuine way that you can measure meritocracy. But I think I have a problem with how it's sometimes used within the tech industry. And the book, just going to plug, Invisible Women by Caroline Perez, explains this far better than I'm going to. But my take is that sometimes a tech company will say, at our company, we believe in meritocracy. We just hire the best people for the job. And this isn't to say that I don't think that each company has a technical bar that they hire for, but that this phrase is used to just essentially absolve a company of any responsibility for their hiring process or their recruitment strategy. So let's break down, we just hire the best people for the job. I think what they really mean is that they will hire the best people they can find, or the best people that from who have applied. If your applicant pool is only students from the top 10 universities, you've already self-selected what you think indicates the best candidate, not who is in fact the best candidate. And if you were truly looking for the best candidate, their background or location wouldn't be a factor. And you would scour the earth for them to try and find the team for your company. But of course, that would be too expensive. So that's not what companies do. All this to say that the more, sorry, all this to say that the more expansive your outreach and diversity of applications are, the more meritocratic you truly are. Secondly, the definition of best people changes depending on the company, and most companies hire for technical skill level, yes, but also this idea of a culture fit and general alignment to their mission, which is just as important. And that isn't something quantifiable. This is usually actually determined by the set of people who interview you, and it's extremely subjective. So this even further breaks down this idea of meritocracy. Lastly, I think the context in which we talk about meritocracy in tech is usually what I take issue with. It's used as an excuse for a lack of diversity within a company, which just isn't good enough. Your company will only ever be as diverse as where you recruit from and your subsequent applicant pool, which is something you have oversight of. So if you want to do something about it, you could. Just replying, we're a company that believe in meritocracy, we just hire the best people, is not justifiable.
Oh my
I
God.
completely agree.
It's so good.
It's such a good take, because even when I was applying for roles, they would say stuff like, we want only Russell Group students, and that takes away those who haven't been to Russell Group University, for example. And it's so interesting to see, like, just to even see how people value you. Because I remember working for a company, and someone applied for a role. She had a terrible CV. Said that to my manager. He was like, "Yeah, but she worked at Facebook, so she must be good."
Oh.
So we're gonna interview her just because she like landed right at Facebook. And guess what? The interview wasn't good.
Yeah.
The interview wasn't good. He wasn't impressed by her, but it was just like, you can have a name on your CV, which is like, well, we know what that really means, which is that it's competitive, that the interview process is pretty hard. So that person must be good just because they got a role at this company, for example.
Yeah, and that's another example of, like, meritocracy is often, the concept of meritocracy is often used as like an excuse for a narrow perception of what makes someone good, like a biased perception of what makes someone good. And like that's a problem I have with the interview process for a lot of tech companies, and having the really long and lots of stages with really difficult technical tests that you have to do under pressure. Like, you're asking someone to perform well on your very strict definition of what you think good is, and you're calling that meritocracy. So I agree. It's like it's a really easy way to say, and this is the reason why we're not diverse.
Yeah. And it's all about where you recruit from and where you go. Like, it's, if you say, we only want to go to Oxbridge and Russell Groups, fine, but what is the like diversity of the places that you're recruiting from? And also, you are going to eliminate some of the best candidates. You just are. And it's that self-selection of, we're only going to look here that I take issue with, because if you're going to do that, then, that's your call. I don't agree with it, but you're not like, that's not true meritocracy. You're not saying that we will hire the best people out of everyone. It's we will hire the best people out of this already niche group. The things, even, going to St. Andrews, the steps that I went through in my life, even moving being one of the steps that then led me to go to St. Andrews, like that is a very like small set of people to go and self-select for. And there are so many amazing people across the world. Like, your best candidate might not even be in the UK. So just trying to expand your horizons, and that being your recruitment strategy, I think that's what I've seen as true like meritocratic process, and that's how you get the best people. But it's expensive and it takes a long time, and that's why most companies use shortcuts. But you're not a meritocracy if you do that, is my point.
So what would your advice be to a company that has a limited amount of time but wants to broaden their horizons and hire from a more diverse pool, and try and take that consideration? What would be your like quick win? Yes. Is there a quick win?
No, it takes a lot of time and effort. But since the pandemic, a lot of like virtual audiences have started to pop up. So trying to get an online community that is more diverse, and looking at different, not just universities, but schools, and also people in industry, maybe they did an apprenticeship or had a different way of getting into the tech industry, or people retraining. Maybe you have a couple of years of experience in just business and now you want to go into tech. Like, maybe that person's going to be the best person. And it's also about potential. Like, I think what is missing is this bet hire, which is something we talk about at my company. It's actually, this person doesn't quite have all the skills we're looking for yet, but I think they're going to do so well here. And I think with the right training and mentorship, they would do so well. And like, those are also the people that will be an absolute asset to the company. So I've kind of gone around about here, but virtual audiences and trying to engage people like online is a cheaper way of doing your recruitment, but also looking at those bet hires. It's the people who with the right support can excel, and it takes a good like recruiter or interviewer to spot that, but that's the real like meritocracy.
I completely agree. I was reading a book called Lean In when she actually speaks about this. It's a great book, and she was actually speaking about how men are more likely to be promoted based on their potential, rather than women who have to say, I've done this, this, and this. I'm already doing the job. Now give me the title. And it's quite interesting that it's like we almost, because we're kept being fed that this is a fair world, and when injustice happens, we're just like, oh, it's like this is injustice. It's like we're constantly being gaslighted. Because it's like we're saying that injustice is a thing, and you're telling me that it's not. But it's like, I have proven my worth now, and like to get this promotion, but someone could just have the potential and they've got that promotion over me. You know? So it's interesting how bias like also plays a part in this whole meritocracy kind of concept as well.
I realized that after the tech topic, I wanted to ask if you had any resources or recommendations for me, or for our audience, if anybody wants to find out more about data engineering or wants to feel more empowered about how they're giving away their data or learn more about it. Do you have any resources that you could recommend?
Yeah, I'll definitely share some, and then you can share it with the podcast links. I think that it's better to just give a description there, but I would definitely advise like looking into it and getting more well versed about this, especially because your data like is being used and misused. So it's about, where do you lean in and say, this is something I actually support, or this isn't something that I support. So yeah, I will share some resources.
Fantastic. Amazing. So how do you make sure that you're minimizing bias in your interview process?
Yeah, so I think we do this in a number of ways. You never have just a single interview, right? You usually have a succession of interviews, and then you have what's called sort of a round table where you all discuss the candidate afterwards. And if, one person says, I don't think we should move forward, but the other two do, then generally the person does still move forward. So that eliminates one, maybe you had like one off interview or you were nervous, it kind of eliminates that. Or just generally, if your personality is quite different or your way of approaching the problem was really different to the interviewer, that's how we can eliminate bias. But also I think sometimes even the length of time of the interview helps to alleviate bias. I think in the first few minutes you may have an impression of the candidate, and I'll keep it as impression because you definitely haven't made a decision at that point, but you have an impression of how you think the rest is going to go. But throughout the like hour that you have together, you then start to get a concrete opinion, and then ultimately afterwards you make a decision. But it's not something where the interview ends and I'm like, we have to hire, or we shouldn't hire, or like that would be my recommendation. But again, it's not just on me. It's the process over time where you're like, okay, this is my opinion, this is my thesis, and then you compare it with others, and then together you kind of have this united, okay, this is what we're going to do. And generally there's a stage after my stage as well, and that's the person who really gets to decide. So difference in opinion by having multiple interviewers, and also the time, like even if you start maybe a bit nervous or you're unsure in the beginning, like you still have a lot of time with that interviewer, and you can swing an interview at any point. Sometimes it's just something you said at the end where they're like, there's something about this candidate, like I'm thinking maybe we should give them a chance, or at least move them on to the next stage. So yeah, I think sometimes you can get caught up if you're having a series of interviews and you're like, oh, that first one didn't go that well. Every interview is a new interview, and if the other interviewers are like, love that candidate, then you're still going to be moved forward. Even if the first is like, I didn't really get the signal, I'm not sure how well they did, you still have a chance. And as I said, even up to the last 5 minutes, they haven't made their decision yet.
And what about for me as an individual, if hypothetically I'm interviewing somewhere and I have the kind of chip on my shoulder that I don't have a CS degree, I'm not necessarily from the best educated background, I know that I have a non-traditional route into tech, like what can I do to feel empowered in a situation where bias might be at play in these interviews?
Yeah, so I'd say generally if you've got to that stage, like no one's really focusing that much on your like background at that point. It's how you perform in the interview. So again, that idea that each interview is a fresh interview, it's a fresh chance for you to showcase yourself. Just remembering that and knowing this is a new person. They've like glanced at your CV, but they don't know you yet. So like you can then really like get them to get to know you. Another thing is just being prepared. So preparing the like technical side. So using HackerRank, LeetCode to do the technical prep. Know stuff about the company, like think about what your day-to-day could look like there, and like why would you want to work there, and just the general questions about your projects and where you name a time you failed, and like general things like that. Like going in it prepared is very important, because if you come across as confident, that is so much of the interview, honestly. And just clear and concise with your answers and your solution is also really important. If you could be a great candidate, but if you're unable to get your ideas or articulate your ideas to the interviewer, then they're just not going to know them, right? And it is tough, especially virtual interviews. I find harder to connect with the candidate, but really just trying to eliminate that awkwardness or like going over that thing. But yeah, again, this is hopefully something across the time of the interview it can come out.
Amazing.
Do
you have any questions?
No, do you have any questions?
No, that's it from me.
Cool. Is there anything that you wanted to add, or we can like is there anything that you'd want to touch on? Or
no, other than just thank you so much for having me, and really excited to talk about these topics. If anyone wants to continue the conversation or connect with me, please provide my LinkedIn.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
everyone can connect from there. I have a few like mentees as well, so if you're getting into tech or transitioning into tech, definitely shoot me a question and I'll definitely get back to you.
She's gonna have like hundreds of
I
questions.
know. Like imagine having someone like Zoe at the beginning of your career. That's a like, very valuable resource. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us on Glowing in Tech. We really loved hearing like more about you and your insights into various different topics as well.
I'm also very excited to see where you go if this is what you've done in just a few years. Like imagine her in 10. She's going to be...
Yeah,
I'm very excited. I think Zoe's going to be retired, like on a farm, like living her best life at this point. It's just like the hustle culture is done after 5 years.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so
again,
much.
thank you so much.
Cool.
Thank you so much for watching part 2 of Zoe's episode, and tune in next week when we'll be meeting Charlene Hunter, who is the CEO of Coding Black Females.
Jenny started, it was like discovering this computer and then having 2 fantastic people who enabled me and encouraged me to grow even further as I was going through that journey. And then me deciding that I did not want to be in tech because it was a dying industry.